Chapter 3. After that the burning summer days seemed to race past, and Onesimus worked from dawn to dusk. The wheat harvest was nearly in, and there were rejoicings on the threshing floor, sacrifices and processions. And before the grain was stored in the underground pits, the grapes were ripe for vintage. Gangs of slaves worked all day long in the vineyards, picking the grapes, spreading them out to dry, carrying them in great cartloads to the winepress, pruning the vines, and holding high festivals to Bacchus. It was a merry time of year, and Onesimus loved it. By the time they started to gather the figs and pomegranates, the poplars in the upper plain were beginning to turn golden along with the bracken that clothed the lower hillsides. The air was heady and sweet as good wine, and every housetop was gay with its store of raisins, figs, corn, and pomegranates drying in the sunshine. Cool and clear were the mornings, with mists rising from the river in the valley and all the trees heavy with fruit. It seemed as if their mother Cybele was pouring out showers of gifts on her children in prodigal, wasteful abundance, as a last token of her blessing before the dark wintry days should come. But before they were through with the olive harvest, well before the olive was stored, the first snows were flurrying down the ravines, and the conical peak at the east of the glen and the towering head of Cadmus were powdered with snow. Winds were beginning to howl round the canyons and across the plains, and winter was upon them, with jackals and hyenas howling in the gorges, with the rain and mud, the silence of the snow, and the angry crimson sunsets down the valley. The rich lit their great heating braziers, and slaves were kept busy piling on the charcoal. But the slaves themselves, in their leaking mud huts, fared ill. The great roads to the east were blocked by snow, and no travelers passed by, and no news reached them from the outer world. There was little to do and nothing to talk about except the bitter cold and the old slave's rheumatism. But there came a day when Onesimus went out at dawn and heard the bleating of the first young lambs, and felt a breath of warm south wind stealing down from the high passes, and he knew that on the other side of the mountains the sea was blue. He looked down and saw a clump of dwarf narcissi flowering in mud. Spring was on the way. Very soon the spring plowing and sowing would begin, and the storks would arrive from Syria. Everyone stirred to the breath of the south wind. The sun shone out and the snows began to melt. The cascades overflowed their banks, half flooding the meadows as they foamed to the valley. Ships began to cross the sea, and the roads were once again thronged with merry travelers, bringing tales from east and west. Mistress Apphia, Philemon's wife, took advantage of the fine weather to spring clean her mansion, and so there was plenty of work to do, and little Pascasia, their daughter, adopted a motherless lamb and nursed it like a baby. "We are going over to Laodicea this week," said Archippus, carelessly one spring evening, pausing at the door of the stable where Onesimus was cleaning and polishing his master's riding equipment. "My father and I are both to be fitted with a new trimaton at Master Palamon's establishment, and I am to have new sandals. I will give you my old ones, Onesimus." Onesimus acknowledged his favor as ungraciously as he dared. He could not understand Archippus these days. He was growing at an alarming rate, and at 15 was almost as tall as his father, and he alternated between snubbing and humiliating Onesimus in every possible way, and then seeking him out and trying to regain their old comradeship and offering him presents. But he might as well have tried to be friendly with a brick wall, and he little knew how every slight and wounding word was being stored up in the boy's memory. Archippus had become to him the symbol of his slavery, and he hated him with all the strength of his proud young heart. Archippus sighed. He longed to possess this boy wholly and to gain his devotion and respect and admiration, but when they were together, something always whispered that it was hopeless. He rose, knowing himself defeated, but still he lingered. "I have to take a chain of my mother's down to the goldsmith's for repair," he said at last. "Be ready to accompany me in an hour's time." As they sauntered down the road towards the town, Onesimus's black mood lightened, for the beauty of the early spring days always moved and lifted him. The almond blossom twisting from the naked wood and the gold of the dandelions along the roadside made even Archippus seem less odious, and had he been alone he would have run and leapt and praised the gods. As it was, he walked, as befitted a slave, 2 or 3 paces behind his young master, obstinately refusing Archippus's invitation to forget the relationship and walk together. "I hope my father will take you in attendance tomorrow," said Archippus generously. "The streets of Laodicea are a real sight after the dull little streets of Colossus, and they say that Master Polemon lives in a marble mansion. Little Mistress Irene no doubt will have grown throughout the winter. I must take her some little gift." A small cloud passed over the face of the sun, and Onesimus trudged on in silence. "The messenger who came to summon us to Laodicea brought news of the world beyond Colossus," went on Archippus with a little laugh. "In Thyatira, the dye merchants are complaining about the Jewish settlers. The new emperor, Nero, flourishes in Rome, and no emperor has ever lived so gloriously or in more royal style. Down in Ephesus, the Greek traders and the local silversmiths have been rioting in the streets again. The priests are anxious for the honor of their goddess, and not only on account of the competition of trade. There are rumors of a strange new teaching that seems to be taking root everywhere, the teaching of some Jewish peasant who died by crucifixion in his own capital. It is strange how ignorant people will fall for every new-fangled ridiculous fable they hear." "Jesus," said Onesimus, startled in speech. "They say he rose again from the dead?" "Where and from whom did you hear that?" asked Archippus, turning round sharply. Onesimus's frequent knowledge of subjects about which he himself often knew nothing had always annoyed him. "I hear these things," replied Onesimus lightly, for the memory of his father was a wound he had never shown to Archippus. "Well, they say the teaching has already taken root in Hierapolis," went on Archippus. "A native of our own city, Colossus, who has been working with some tent makers at Ephesus, has been wintering there. The followers of Jesus are making quite a stir. They cease to fear the demons or to offer sacrifices, and they worship one invisible God. Jews and Carians, Greeks and Phrygians, all mixed up together like a lot of silly tame sheep. They say that the temple priests as well as the Jews have tried to suppress the movement, but these people are patient under persecutions. One of their maxims is to love and forgive their enemies. That is what that crucified peasant leader of theirs did." "Well, I don't want to love or forgive my enemies," said Onesimus with quiet finality, and the two boys fell silent until they reached the town. It was a prosperous little town, centered on its wool market and its purple dye works. On the outskirts stood a fast-growing Jewish colony with its isolated, unpopular community. The boys sauntered through the streets, lingering near the open-fronted shops. Delicious smells came from the cooked meat shops, and merry crowds jostled with each other at the entrance of the wine shops. Watered gardens with marble statues lay between the streets where children ran and shouted, playing hopscotch or bowling their hoops. They passed the temple and the school where Archippus had once learned reading and writing and mathematics, Latin and Greek. It was always a source of wonder to Onesimus, who would have given almost anything to learn to read, that Archippus had persuaded his father to take him away from school so early. "Geometry, astronomy, philosophy, and music!" he had exclaimed to Onesimus. "What good will they ever do me? I want to learn to take over my father's farm and trade and make money and travel. Am I not his only son?" And since this was an argument that had appealed to Philemon, Archippus had left school at 13 and 2 years later was already showing himself as an able overseer with a flair for money-making. The goldsmith's shop was in a small side street, and they found him intent on heating his gold in a little crucible that looked like an eggshell. Heating and refining, he crouched over his furnace, absorbed in his work, till the 7 times purified liquid showed him his own face as in a mirror. The boys, unwilling to interrupt him, stood waiting. Archippus stared thoughtfully at an exquisite little chain and pendant. "I should like to hang that round the little white throat of Mistress Irene," he said. "And see, Onesimus, these bracelets, what cunning craftsmanship! And these curious little figures of the gods!" He roamed restlessly round the shop, but Onesimus stood still, watching the bubbling metal and the skilled hands of the craftsmen purging the gold of its dross. At last the old man looked up, and Archippus handed him the broken necklace and explained what his mother wanted done. Very respectfully the goldsmith promised to have it ready next day, for Philemon was one of his richest clients, and he was pleased that Philemon's son should have honored his little shop by coming in person. He would have asked many questions concerning the health and welfare of his patron's establishment, but Archippus seemed eager to leave the shop. Instead of lingering to watch the bales of wool being unloaded or to listen to a wandering street musician, he hurried on at a round pace until the two boys were once more on the steep track that led to their upland farm. "What is the hurry, master?" asked Onesimus in surprise, pausing for breath at the bottom of the hill. "You should be back at your work," replied Archippus. "My father will be needing you. Come, don't dawdle about." He was already hurrying ahead when Onesimus called to him. "Stop, master. Wait. Someone is riding after us and shouting at us. An old man, by the way he rides. Why is it the goldsmith, mounted like a sack on an old mule, waving his whip as though some disaster had happened? He will fall off if he drives that poor old beast any faster." Then suddenly he stopped laughing, for Archippus was standing grave and irresolute, and his face was very white. "Stupid old man," he muttered. "Whatever can he want? Let us go on, Onesimus, and take no note of him." "But, master," said the slave, "he will catch us up in no time unless he breaks his neck first." And indeed the old man had already left the town behind and was careering up the slope, beating the mule for all he was worth. His headdress was all askew, and he was clutching the mule by the mane. Onesimus, without further ado, ran to meet him and was just in time to catch him as he slithered off sideways. "Can I help you, father?" asked Onesimus. "Has anything happened?" "Let me speak to your master," cried the old man. He was trembling with shock and seemed half distraught. "Ah, young master, come hither. What is this that you boys have done? The chain and locket, it is gone. Shame on you to trick an old man so." There was a moment's silence. Just for a second Arquebus seemed uncertain what to reply. Then he spoke, and his voice was haughty. "We know nothing of your chain, Master Plautus. Maybe some other customer." "There was no other customer," cried the old man, wringing his hands. "Do you think I do not know my gold as a father knows his children? Could one piece be missing and I would not know it with my whole soul and body? Oh, you are fleet-footed, but you cannot escape me." He was trembling all over. "Unless that chain is restored, I will walk beside you to the house of Master Philemon and search you both in his presence. Ah, me, do you not fear the gods that you should do this to a poor old man?" "Peace, Master Plautus," said Arquebus quietly. "There is no need to take you so far up the hill. Already your ride has been too much for you. You may search us here on the path. I will search my slave here in your presence, and then you are at liberty to search me." He took hold of Onesimus rather roughly and dragged him into the middle of the path. At the same time he shouted, "Look to your mule, Master Plautus." The animal, unnoticed, was making off quietly toward home. The goldsmith hobbled a few steps down the path and returned, dragging the beast by its bridle. He was dizzy and breathless, bewildered between watching the boys and fear of a sudden bite from the mule. Arquebus passed his hands carefully over Onesimus's person, removed his sandals, shook out his cloak. Then he removed his thick girdle, and as he did so the gold chain fell to the ground and lay sparkling in the sun in full view of them all.